Okay, so Nancy, we were just talking about Annapolis and my dad, and you were talking about the marriage of David and Betty Bell. Was
Well,
who was born first? Was one of Betty's children born before
no,
Dad?
I had a child before Betty had any.
Okay, and who was that?
uh, I had, well, it was a plan. When we got to Annapolis, we had a little wood. We had a nice little cottage, sort of in the woods, and I liked it very much, and we enjoyed it. But I got pregnant then, purposely, and I I was sick every day until the child was born.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I was sorry to have it, boy. And we were right behind the hospital, so of course I had it at the hospital right there. And mother came and helped us, and breastfed him for a while. And then he had to go to the hospital and have surgery on his face because he had, as you know, cleft palate.
But you were telling me yesterday about the story of when Dad was born, which I found hilarious. Because you went by yourself. You went with Granddad to the hospital,
Yes.
and then they told him to go home.
Yes, and they would phone him when the baby was born, which they did. The baby was born, and they phoned him and phoned him and phoned him. He was down asleep and didn't hear the phone. You know, real upset about me, of course. Jeez. Well, he finally did. But what they wanted him to do was to tell me about the fact that he had a cleft palate and would have to have medical attention, you see. And so we were fortunate to be in Annapolis because we took him to Johns Hopkins, one of the finest hospitals in the United States, actually. And the doctor there that took care of him had the same thing happen to him. So he was just great. And he told me once, it just flabbergasted me, that now, and he's a little older, not when he was born, that when he was having one of his operations, because he had to have several, that he looked up and smiled at him in the middle of the operation. I said, well, wasn't he, under thing? And he said, well, yes, but he said he was so young, they don't feel the pain that some older person does. And he said, that's what he told me. He looked up during the operation and smiled at me. So he had to be several months old then. That was the thing. But he was a very good baby. And my mother came at first to help because I had to pump my milk and refrigerate it and then warm it up for him. And he couldn't hold a bottle, so we had a special little thing that we squeezed it in his mouth just gently, enough to swallow everything. And he was just a real good baby. And luring him to security and having another one who was a nightmare to take care of from the beginning almost.
Well, we have 6 more years to get through before we get to Uncle Phil.
Yes.
But so you were in Annapolis with Granddad and my dad, with both Joes, Joseph Allen Dodson Jr., Joseph Allen Dodson III. And then
one of
Granddad...
the cute things that your daddy did, want to tell you. In those days, you went, when you had a duty, you went immediately, within a week or two, to call upon your boss on a weekend probably, which is what we all did. And then they returned the thing. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't, because they were busy people. And they may have too many to do. At any rate, his first boss there at the Naval Academy, and I never allowed smoking in the house. And because I never smoked myself, and I didn't like the tobacco smoking and stuff, so I didn't allow anybody to smoke. Well, when they came, she immediately lit a cigarette. And of course, I wasn't about to tell the boss's wife she couldn't smoke in my house. But what Joseph did, every time she knocked her cigarette to put the ashes, he'd pick it up and take it out the kitchen and put it in the wastebasket. He was just a little fella, but he knew. And she thought that was so cute. She didn't know why he was doing it. If she'd known why, she wouldn't have thought he was so cute. I knew why he was doing it, but I was getting nervous about it because I thought she might be annoyed. Instead, she said, "Isn't he cute? Look what he does." So does I. Anyhow, that was really funny. That was one of the funny things that happened that I remember, because they were real nice days. He was such a good baby. He grew up very nicely and slept well when he was supposed to. He was a real angel.
So then you were in Annapolis with Granddad.
Yes.
And then, do you remember where you went next?
Well, I'm trying to think, but I don't remember right now. So I'll tell you a little bit about what we did in Annapolis.
Sounds good.
We like to go fishing.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh. And your dad was just a little tiny boy, but he liked the fishing. And so he got a pole and been in, and every once in a great while a fish would get off his pole. So, of course, I was watching very closely. And Joe had his dipper right ready to snatch it up before. And we had to watch he wouldn't fall in, of course. But he liked to go fishing with us. And that was something we did sometimes on a Saturday afternoon. Because Joe was working, of course, 5 days a week. Although teaching, he was over with sort of early in the day. It was kind of nice, but he had to grade papers and stuff, and he did all that at the office before he came home. And
there's something I can
nice.
understand. Right?
And the other nice thing that was nice was that Jim Smith's brother was at the Naval Academy, his youngest brother, and his mother had died about 1.5 years before I got there. But as soon as I got there, he was fast. Every Saturday that he had off, he would come up, not everyone, but he would come over frequently, and I became very fond of him, and terribly distressed when he crashed in a plane. So that's a later story, but just adored him. He was a real peach, and I was very glad to have him.
What was his name?
And he played with Joe.
What was his name?
Fritz.
Fritz Smith.
Fritz Smith, yeah. And the other thing that was kind of nice was that he had several friends, and occasionally some of those would come over. So that's how I got to know some. And frequently, we would be the chaperones, which they had if they took girls out on the sailing vessels. They had to have a chaperone, and we had the job. So Joe didn't have to do any work. We just sat there and enjoyed the sailboating, because the midshipmen did all the work, you see, and played. But they had, and the kitchen always gave us a picnic, you see, kind of a thing to have when you were aboard the ship. So we had pleasant times with that. And the ones that I got to be a babysitter for Joseph were the nurses at the hospital right behind me. They liked to have the extra pay, and they enjoyed him, and they knew how to take care of him when I was gone. So that was important too. He was baptized in the big chapel there, by the way.
In what?
In Annapolis.
And
on the
sort
grounds.
Of under what?
What?
What faith denomination?
Lutheran.
Lutheran.
Yes. They had two different pastors. You never knew what they might be, but one of them did happen to be a Lutheran, and I wanted to baptize him right away since he was having operations and things.
And you grew up Lutheran,
and that was
right?
a private baptism. It wasn't done during church. What?
You grew up Lutheran.
Yes.
And Granddad grew up Episcopalian, is that right?
He's Episcopalian. I'm a Lutheran. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, we didn't go to the same churches. We both went to church, but we went to different ones. Oh. But later on, I'll tell you more about that.
Okay, and so Granddad was teaching this whole time.
He was teaching history and I think it was economics.
Economics, okay.
Yeah, that's when he went to Washington to get to improve his economics, because he knew his history, and Joe loved history, and he had made A's in it all the way through. That's why he was chosen. They look up their record and see what their best subjects are, and then they hire them for that purpose, and they needed history teachers, so they had Joe, and he was available.
So generally, how long were the duty assignments? 2 years, 3 years?
We were there 3 years. It was supposed to be 2 because of Joseph and the hospital and operations and things. They allowed us a 3rd year. Now, although we lived in this little house in the woods, which I liked everything, eventually, after less than being there a year, I believe, because I was still, we got quarters at the Naval Academy. Very good quarters, by the way. By the time Joseph was born, we were settled well into that. It was a big house. It had 3 bedrooms and great big living room and big kitchen thing. It was an old cottage, so it was built that way. And it was nice. We had nice neighbors, and it was better than being in the apartment buildings where there are 6 families, maybe.
Mm-hmm. And then, so then when Granddad was finishing up teaching for 3rd year, did he get sent somewhere else?
You know, I've made a mistake. We didn't go to the Naval Academy that time. We went to, can I go back now?
Yes, you remember.
I'm retreating.
Right.
I'm retreating. Joe went out to sea again when we came back that time. But when he came home from the war was still going on, to the best of my knowledge. And they built in the down part of Maryland, they built an academy, not an academy, a Navy base down there. It was really a fishing town, and it had a little hotel in it that we stayed in the first night we went there. Well, we quickly found out it was a hotel, really, but the prostitutes were all on the floor.
Oh, dear.
Because it had been a fishing village, and they had kept it that way. It was still a fishing village.
So Granddad went back out to sea after you saw him in California.
Yes.
For
and then when he came back.
Another
yes.
basically year?
Yes, I said we went to the Naval Academy. I was mistaken. We went down because the war was still going on a little bit. I can't remember when it stopped. But we lived in a cabin, literally. It was a wood cabin. And we didn't have any heat in the winter, but a fireplace in the living room. But the Navy furnished us lumber and would bring it out and stack it up and everything for us. And so we had this one wood fire in the winter time to keep us warm. Otherwise, you stayed in bed and got warm.
Oh. All right, well, we'll continue on that subject when we come back.